We want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Boss Juice podcast. I'm Sean. I'm sitting here with Jaden, who is actually filling in today for Antonino. He's out and about. He's traveling, and we're honored to have a guest here, Eric Booth from Desmone Architects. Is that the official name of the firm?
Yeah, Desmone Architects. Yeah. Okay. Sometimes we go by Desmone because we're architects and interior designers. But
Tell just a quick little background of the business and get our audience familiar with what you guys do here and kind of your role.
Sure. So we're one of the oldest firms in Pittsburgh. We were actually founded in 1958 by a gentleman named John Desmone. And then John Desmone, his nephew Luke, sort of followed in his footsteps, and then Luke's son Chip. And so he was a third generation up until recently. And so Luke has passed away. Obviously, John has passed away quite some time. Chip is currently our CEO. And then we've gone from, when I came here, we were about 15 people. We're about 45 now. And so we've gone from a family firm to one where we have actually 10 owners now. And I'm currently the second largest shareholder, and I'm the president of the company.
Wow, that's really cool.
I do want to just educate the audience real quick that this is by far, in my young career, I still got some years left, but this is the absolute coolest workspace office I've ever seen. So, and I know that adds to your guys' mission statement. Yeah. When I was researching you guys, I imagined your office would be kind of parallel to what you attempt to do or what you guys do for your clients. Or I kind of wanted to also hear a little bit about the exact niche that you guys hold, because sure. I kind of gathered it when I was doing research, but.
Yeah, so to your point, within the space we're in right now is our space on Doughboy Square in Lawrenceville. For those of you familiar, if you've driven by and you've seen that building where there's a Doughboy statue, the soldier statue out front, that's us. So an old bank building. It was the original building that we're in now, I believe, was built in 1901, and then it served as a bank for a fairly short amount of time, then went under. And then in the 90s, the firm, or the owners of the firm, purchased the building, renovated it, and then basically that was really not just sort of allowed our firm to kind of go from there, but also really kickstarted a lot of development in Lower Lawrenceville. So I actually credit a lot of the development of Lawrenceville and sort of the sort of rehabilitation here because of that move that the firm made back in the mid-90s. Wow. And so that was, this was an adaptive reuse project, taking something that was one thing and making it something new. That defines a lot of the work that we do. Not exclusively, we do new stuff, but adaptive reuse is a big part of the kind of work that we do as a company.
Okay. That's cool. This building, again, maybe we'll get some still photos or some little video clips to incorporate into this podcast, but because I think it is such a beautiful place, and it speaks volumes about, I think, the kind of work that you do. I think what a great way to showcase what you do by having this fabulous facility. Yep. To serve as like a display for what you're capable of. It's really cool. It's beautiful.
The other part of this, which is the addition part back there, we put the addition on because we kind of grown out of the building several years ago. And then when we did that addition, we did it as well gold certified. And so we are one of the few buildings in Western PA that are well gold certified. And for those that don't know, I like to kind of talk about it in terms of, first of all, LEED. So most people have heard of LEED, right? So LEED is a rating system, looks at how buildings impact the environment. Well, WELL is a rating system that looks at how buildings impact people. So think about air quality, light quality, all the things that impact, but also not just the physical things, but also things like policy, the fact that we have healthcare for our people and so forth. And so when we did the addition, we were the first WELL Gold certified building in Western PA, but that was basically a reflection of our culture. And essentially this piece, so the old piece that we're in now, the new piece is sort of that blending between old and new, right? And then sort of where we sort of dwell is in between these kind of spaces. And that kind of really sort of reflective of a lot of the work we do. Respecting the past, but then also honoring the present and the future and creating buildings that are designed for people.
Yes. I just want to add this real quick because I personally have a passion for this. I had visited Charleston for the first time in South Carolina, and it was just breathtaking to me because of the fact that the architecture is almost 100% honoring the entire history of the city. So it feels as if it's almost like European Renaissance style buildings, and it just was breathtaking to me. I'd never really experienced something like that before. So when you're explaining this, it seems like you guys align to the same psychology or ideology.
And if you look at the detailing, I mean, obviously the interior, but the exterior detailing of this building is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it may be possible to do this nowadays, but not economically. And so the more we can do to kind of restore these buildings and keep them, we simply cannot build buildings like this one anymore. You know?
Okay.
And so as much as we can do to preserve these things and then reuse them for new things, that's kind of work that really excites me.
From a just a creative standpoint too, just think of the kind of mind that you need to have. So I think when you're building brand new construction or designing something that hasn't pre-existed, you have a clean slate. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're trying to retrofit or turn something that was already established into something new, and not only looking at the utility of it and the aesthetics, you know, and all the things that you need to do, you have to be a different type of thinker, really, for enable that to happen. How do you do that? How do you go in and visualize what something could be? How do you do that?
I mean, the first step that we take, I mean, besides obviously considering what it needs to be, is go in and really sort of carefully think about what is the building telling us? Mm-hmm. What are the possibilities here? Yeah. And sometimes they're not obvious. And so that's what we're trained to kind of look for those things. But sometimes we'll just go and just spend very silent time walking around a building, sitting there. You know, there are some stories of people spending nights at places to kind of get a sense of what that character is. Yeah. You know, what was it? It can't be that anymore, but what can we draw from the past to end that sort of creating something new, right? And so then the work that we end up doing is how can we basically create something new out of something that was old? And then that to me is really where that dialogue between old and new, you know, what was, what is, what can be, that's really where the magic lies. I mean, with a brand new blank slate, it's all new, right? I mean, I find those projects a little bit boring, frankly. You know, it's much easier for me as a designer to come into an existing context and see what is it around here? What is it telling me? What is it? I want to create something that is both of that place and then is new at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so existing buildings or even just cities and so forth are really great opportunities for that. And so it starts really by looking at what's there and what was there. And then also starting to imagine what can be based on those things.
Yeah, it's almost like I think you're looking at the personality, not only the physical structure, but the community, the people in the community. It's really cool.
Correct.
So this is a good opportunity because the audience just got a really good idea of kind of where you and your team are at from a professional and creative perspective. But kind of personally, let's go back and kind of talk about your early days getting into this industry, schooling, and then kind of the natural process that got you to this place where this is your niche within your industry.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that this goes back to just being a child growing up in Western PA. You know, so I grew up in the middle of nowhere down in Washington County, right between Bentleyville and Cokeburg, and my playground was a strip mine. You know, my grandfather had stripped out his property, you know, and so I played amongst massive machines. And so when I wasn't dodging machines, you know, that were earth moving, I was basically in the woods or whatever, spent a lot of time by myself. And I started to think about the sort of relationship, like what kind of around me created space. And so I didn't necessarily have the tools to build like a whole treehouse per se, but I would start creating spaces within woods, just a very simple thing like a clearing of something, right? Using a piece of wood over here, finding this over here, creating kind of spaces. And then that was sort of kind of the start. I also would do things like I would find, you know, old, like those massive tires that would be on the earth movers and then play within those. I mean, those would create really kind of fun spaces. And if you're an imaginative kid, right, that starts to kind of inform things. And so, you know, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. I mean, no one in my family had gone to college. I mean, I'd never met an architect. I didn't know what that was. But as I started to, you know, get a little bit older and thought about what I was interested in, I realized I was interested in everything. Like I liked art, I liked math, I liked physics, I liked history, I liked psychology. And really the only thing that I knew that combined all of those things was architecture. You think about it, architecture is one of the things that combines every one of those aspects. I kind of had the naive assumption that architecture was just art plus math. I mean, in some levels it kind of is those things, but it goes so much more beyond that. And so, you know, that was sort of my thought. And so when I was in high school and even through grade school, I found myself interested in a lot of different subjects. So I was artistic, I loved to draw, but again, I liked every subject I did. So I kind of came time to go to think about college, it was like, okay, well, what are the possible professions? And I was in some advanced art classes. So I was in like an art program that would be similar to what you would see like a Kappa. So if Kappa is like a high school, which by the way, my son goes to now. So if Kappa is like a school that collects all these things, I was in a program that was sort of similar to that. And then so architecture kind of became a path. And then I ended up deciding upon Cornell University, which is where I got my undergraduate degree. And then while I was there, I studied, you know, not just the architecture, but that program really taught us to really challenge everything that we saw. So the first thing they told us when we went there was, and actually I'll back up a second. So I had already agreed to go to Cornell, and I was on a trip. I'd taken a trip down to Cancun prior to that, and I was on the way back on the plane, and I had a Cornell hat. I had not been to Cornell yet, so I had a Cornell hat, and then I was in the seat, and some guy behind me says, "Hey, you go to Cornell?" I said, "Oh no, I'm getting ready to go there in the fall." He's like, "Oh really? What are you studying?" I said, "Architecture." And he kind of does this. He's like, "I just graduated from that program."
Wow.
And like, how random is this? Like, I mean, literally the program graduates like 25 people per year, right?
Wow.
And I'm like, and so this was like, how funny is this?
Yeah.
And I said, "Do you have any advice for me?" And he said, "Yes. Forget everything you think you knew about architecture." And that's all he said.
Man.
And I thought, what does that mean? What does that mean, right? I found out exactly what that meant when I went to school.
Yeah.
Because they really try to break you down. It's like you go there, and it's like there's sort of this misnomer of like, well, you have to learn drafting. No, they didn't want you to have any experience in any of those things. So we went in, it was designed from the beginning. Like our first year, we didn't look at a whole lot of architecture per se at buildings. We looked at form, space, all these types of things. So it was like this whole sort of foundational way of rethinking everything. A wall is not just a wall. A column is not just a column. It does other things. It creates something different. And so it sort of rebuilt an entire sort of foundation. And then through that, I found that what informed these things, like what would inform why you would choose a wall versus a column versus this color versus that, had to do more with things like psychology, philosophy, history, culture, all these other types of things. So then I was fascinated. I'm like, I want to figure out the perfect way to design buildings. So I studied psychology and so forth. And then it led me to kind of doing all these different subjects. And that's really what's informed the way that I approach design. Is really the combination of all these sort of different types of subjects.
Circling back to this building, and like I said, I want to get some video and some clips of this building, but think of like what we're experiencing right now. The light, the way the light comes in, the acoustics. So I'll date myself again. When I was a kid, I used to listen to the Cowboy Junkies, and they had a recording. It was called the Trinity Sessions, and they recorded in a cathedral in a church. Yep. And I think the acoustics in here have that similar quality. And I think you've got to take all of those things into consideration when you're doing that. And the fact that you said, about forgetting what you know and start, what a great piece of advice that somebody had given you. Because I think that could apply to so many different things. You go into something thinking you know so many things, and really, I think when you peel back, I think you got an opportunity to learn a lot more, open that mind back up. Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a matter of us necessarily knowing things that other people don't know. It's just knowing how to recognize it. So for example, you mentioned this space, and it's large, right? Why would it be, think about, if you had money in 1910, why would it be important you'd walk into a big building that was grand, right? To remember that people, like banks were places where you kept your money safe. So you wanted a grand space. That's why we made those buildings look, that's why we hearkened back to Roman times or Greek times, because those meant longevity, right? They meant something was gonna be safe. We talked about the Dollar Bank building earlier. Right. Why are there lions in the front of the building, right? It's to protect. It's this whole idea that this is a place that is protection. You take your money there, your money's gonna be safe. That kind of thinking, right, led to the choices they made for those things, the elements, the grandness. It's the same thing here. Like, why was this space so grand? It was serving a purpose.
So I live in Sharpsburg, PA, and I kind of was introduced to the concept while also like studying history as well. Why I live near St. Mary's Church, which is one of the most beautiful, external churches that I've seen in the Pittsburgh area, and the reason why in a small town or like a little subsector like Sharpsburg, why the church is the tallest building, it's to show reverence to God. It was their way of showing reverence to God. And that psychology is just something that I've been thinking about lately. So it's really cool hearing what you're saying.
Go to any little town, right? In America, you see you know where the church is because it's the tallest white steeple, right? Why do they do that? This is an important place. We're reaching to the sky. This is a sacred place. That's why they did it. It had a purpose to it.
So I kind of want to just transition it real quick to this. You had mentioned that doing a building like the one we're in now would be difficult economically, but even from a creative perspective, do you think that currently the way that we're kind of going in society, not to make this too deep or profound, but do you think that the things that you learned in college are slowly being transitioned away because of economic factors, because of just speed?
Not necessarily. I mean, we have to remember that economics was part of every project. And we look back at these old buildings, but these buildings were built by, people who were looking to do 150-year-old buildings, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, they were trying to outdo each other. They were using buildings as a competitive advantage. And, there's a lot of people that talk about, well, people are not as creative anymore. I don't agree with that at all.
I don't
And in fact, because, a lot of times we have to remember that a lot of those buildings were built on tradition. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a lot of ingenuity there was obviously ingenuity, but ingenuity, like a lot of these forms, these details were repeated from things they'd already seen before. And not to say that was easier, right? But they were building on sort of a lexicon that other people understood. Now, sometimes you have to create lexicons out of nothing, right? Can be much, much harder to do. And there is tremendous innovation happening across the world right now with people in design. It's just not as obvious because it may not look like the traditional architecture that people may like. But in order to achieve the massive spaces we've done, or really intricate kind of things, or really high-tech kind of things, I mean, these are things that really took significant thought, consideration, design, coordinating with other disciplines like mechanical engineers and structural engineers and civil engineers. And so I'd argue that there are buildings now that would absolutely rival in terms of the complexity some of these older buildings. Mm-hmm. But you really kind of have to know what you're looking for and sort of appreciate that.
And I think that goes into just there being this like massive kind of transition in regards to culture. I think that's something that kind of fired off when you mentioned that. I think our entire world, we're shifting culture. We're kind of taking some of the things that we all collectively believe inside of our subcultures that maybe need to be left in the past. We're keeping the things that we feel are still of value, but there is like this great reset happening in culture also because of technology. We're kind of entering into a new age. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. I mean, a lot of people complain a lot of the buildings look the same and so forth, and they're right. And the reason they look the same is because, I mean, either sometimes we're really designing for spreadsheets. I hate to say it. A lot of the multifamily we're doing is really it's code minimum design. It is how can we basically put, and that's not necessarily a bad thing per se, because because if they built it as expensively as they used to, no one could afford to live there, right? So at least in one hand, they're providing spaces for people, but yeah, they may lack the character or the level of detail that things we've had before. But at the same time, they are providing more housing, for example. So
think of the lifestyle too, how lifestyles change. I mean, even more recent history from COVID, with research back to people working from their home offices, things like that. And I know that people are migrating back into office space. But yeah, in the residential side of it, think what our lifestyles are like now. I bought a house maybe like 25 years ago and sold that house since then. But I can remember there were like electrical outlets, maybe 2 in a room or something like that. Right. And I'm like thinking, man, you can't survive on that anymore.
100 amp service for, like a 3-story house kind of thing. Yeah,
it's crazy.
So you're crazy. Like, just to wrap that point up, you feel still very positive about the future. You see where things are going, and you're still excited to see what maybe the generation that's next.
There's potential there. There's absolutely potential there. And in some cases it requires even more creativity. And so I see, and we can sort of lament, sometimes we have both. We have the good, we have the bad, but I'm still hopeful overall that we can still see really sort of great design come from, in the future.
Yes, and I also want to mention that I don't believe that the creatives should take the blame for maybe some of the negative points. It's more so of a financial aspect.
I'd say 95% of the time when I see a building, that looks a certain way, and someone's like, that architect really did a crappy job. I'm like, well, you know what? You don't know what the architect was designing to. And based on who I know that developer is and so forth, I know why it looks like that. So that's what happens sometimes, right? But
Yeah.
So maybe let's go off of that point right there, kind of the relationship. I don't know the exact question to ask, but in regards to the fact that your career consists of being a creative, but then having to work with business individuals like the developers. What is that dynamic like? Because we're having, such different psychologies. How do you keep this energy positive, have empathy for them, even though you're completely different in the way that you're thinking about things? How has that been for you?
Well, we always have to remember that we essentially have 2 major clients. There's the client that actually is paying us to do it. So we could have a developer who has one set of things that they're trying to achieve. It may be an institution, they're trying to achieve things. And so there's a client where the people that are commissioning the building and paying us. But also we as architects, because we have a duty to protect health, safety, welfare, we have a duty to the general public, to the people who use our buildings. So the most obvious thing is to keep people safe, but we also have an obligation to create buildings that are going to fit within the context that they're going to be. So we always have to kind of blend those two, and then sometimes the trick is how do we resolve those things? They're not always in alignment. There's often more in alignment when you have an institutional client that's looking to do a 150-year-old building, right? They want to do quality, they want to do something nice. But then you may have a developer who is basically looking to get in there, sell in 7 years, and be out and have no connection to the community. Well, we have an obligation to both those clients and also to both of the people who are going to occupy that building.
Right.
So for both of them, we also need to be considering who are the people that are going to be using this. Who are the people going to be looking at this and driving by it every single day, right? And we also have to remember that we're designing for them as well, to the greatest extent possible. So that sometimes that's really where the magic comes, is sort of resolving those things and doing it in a way that comes in on budget and does all these things, because that is sort of one of our mandates, right? We have to resolve and sort of juggle all those types of things and those different requirements.
Of course.
It's funny too. So I told you a little bit, I worked Michael Baker Corporation, and there were architects and engineers, and I mean, talk about a dichotomy, two different, really different kind of wired people.
Yes.
And I know it was the engineers wanted to follow the creatives lead, but then the creatives needed to design within certain constraints to make it functional, things like that. But how do you engage with your clients, and what do you look for when you start to pull information from them? What are the key pieces?
The first thing we ask is, why are you doing this? What purpose? I mean, big picture, what is the purpose of this building? What are you trying to achieve? Don't tell us what it's going to look like. Don't tell us how big you want it quite yet, right? What are you trying to achieve? And if that's going to, it's going to be different for everybody. For a hotel, it may be, well, I want to do a 90% or whatever that is.
Right.
That's where we start. And then from that part, we start to drill in, and we have a process we call our visioning process, where we go in and then we basically try to get consensus amongst the stakeholders, right? So, if you're doing a project for like one person and they're making all the decisions, that's kind of easy. You have one point of contact. We never do that stuff anymore. Every project we do is got a broad, we call them stakeholders. So it may be the people that are actually, paying for and building it, and then you've got the people that are going to be using it and so forth. And in some cases, the stakeholder group could be hundreds of people, and then what we have to do is narrow down, figure out who the key decision makers are, and then go through a process of creating alignment, which is different than agreement. Rarely does everyone agree on everything, but you can usually find alignment. And that's why it goes back to that first question. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to achieve? If we can get alignment on the purpose of the building, then all the decisions that were made for that, we always compare back to it. Well, is this allowing us to achieve our goal to have this happen? Yes or no? That becomes the first litmus test. And that's kind of a high level, but then we have a system we go in and process that we go through to then get more specific about, okay, well, yeah, the purpose is this, but how big of a conference room do you need? How many office pods do you need? And that becomes a very iterative process. You're talking about like the engineers. I mean, engineers know more about their particular systems than we do as architects. Architects are more of kind of like the maestros. We're sort of more the conductors. We have to basically conduct all these people who know more about us than in each individual thing they do, but we're sometimes the only ones who could see the entire thing. So it is a relationship that goes back and forth. And like you said, sometimes we'll have one thing and it goes back. It is never a directed kind of thing. It's not a thing where we say, okay, this is what we need to look like, and we walk away. And then the structural engineer comes and like puts a structure behind it. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah. And if you do that way, you can see it just never works, right? Yeah. It is always a dialogue back and forth.
So the point that you just made, I see the universal relatability of it, us being in software development, app development, website development. We're both actually more creative minds, and we have to operate with engineers, coders. So I specifically have one very good friend who I've done projects with, and our work has been able to see the best results when I understand that I have to kind of allow him to give me the parameters.
Right.
Because if I'm going on this vision that, is entering into a place where it's like delusional or not realistic anymore, then I just wasted all that creative time, not actually putting anything that's going to actually come out in the final result.
But at the same time, I think it's your job to challenge, right? It's time to
Yes.
push. You have to push each other, right?
Yes.
You know, we call them fierce conversations. I mean, sometimes a little bit of conflict is a good thing, right? Because I mean, stars are not born. You know, the creativity is a very painful process sometimes. Not necessarily a bad thing. Discomfort can be good when it pushes the envelope and creates something new. Because if you go into it and you don't challenge each other, you get status quo and it's boring, right? What creates interesting things is when there is that little bit of push and pull. We're really sort of challenging ourselves to create something that is actually better than just the baseline of what we're starting off with.
Right. I think it's the same approach in my business, the marketing branding side. You know, I could run in there and say, we could do this. It doesn't really, all these wonderful things we can do, none of those matter if I don't understand what the end goal is.
Right.
In the personality behind it. And,
Right.
you know, every business is different. Every situation is different. This may be a good lead into one of Antonino's questions about asking you about your entrepreneurship and, you know, your career, how you started, what you did when you left, when you came back. Tell us a little bit about this journey that you've had up to this point.
It's been an interesting one. So after my first year of college, I interned with a small firm, and then I went to work for them after I graduated. And so when I was working them, I was working on the board. Lily started off hand drafting. It was 2 architects and a draftsman, and I was like the 4th person working in this office, you know, back in the early mid 90s. And so when I came, after that, I ended up spending my summers in Ithaca at that point, and then worked for, so I kind of got out of the profession for a bit, working for my professor and so forth. But when I went back, after I graduated, they had grown to about 15 people, and they'd brought in engineering. So they were an architecture and engineering company, structural and civil engineering. And so we were about 15 people there. And I came in, and then I basically went back because the 2 architects that I'd been working with were still there. And so, but the problem was, one of the architects, he was sick, and so he ended up passing away about 2 years after I started working there. And then the other architect that was there, within 2 years, he had a botched gallbladder surgery and passed away.
Oh my gosh.
And so I'm now 2 or 3 years out of school, and I'm at a firm where it literally, technically, we had no registered architects. And so it forced us to like, what we're going to do. And we lost several people. Some of the employees jumped ship and they went to other firms. And I stuck around because one of it was the wife of one of the owners who had passed away. She was still one of the owners. And she said, Eric, can you please just stick around? You know, we'll make it worth your while to stick with us. Right. And so I did. So they ended up bringing in another architect. But during that time, I basically had no mentors, right? So I basically had to learn the business really early on. Mm-hmm. So with my one boss who was sick all the time, he was never able to go to client meetings. And so I would go to the client meetings. I mean, I'm like a year out of school going to client meetings with this thing. And then I also, because, you know, and then whenever we lost our bosses, how are we gonna get work? So I had to start learning business development.
Wow.
And then I'm like, oh, how do I know how to be an architect? And that's when I joined and started getting involved with the American Institute of Architects, which is our national and local print, which I'm still a part of, right? And that's how I started creating these connections. So it was like trial by fire. Wow. In my first 3 years of being, and I wasn't even registered yet, I had to basically get into the business because I decided I wouldn't stick with that company and then kind of try to push it through. Wow. So we did that, we stabilized things, and then by the time I became registered, they made me an owner. And so I was the owner for about 3 years with that firm before I decided to leave for a number of reasons. This was back in 2007, 2008. And I was living on the Eastern Shore with my then wife, and we had a son. And we did not like living on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Mm-hmm. I joked it was where culture went to die. I just did not like it. It was boring. I hated it.
Okay.
And so after we had our son, it was like, there's one opportunity to get out of here. And I always say, I can't leave here because this is where my business is. I was the owner of the business, right? And we'd go to different places. We'd go on vacation, like, let's move over here. I can't go over here because my business is here. Well, after we had our son, all that changed. Where would we possibly want to go? So we kicked it around, and long story short, we put it out there, and we decided that we wanted to go to Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh honestly never even showed up on my radar because I had moved away, and my family left here in 1986. And then never came back. I saw a family down in Washington County. But I remember Pittsburgh of the 80s. And I remember Pittsburgh was not a place I would ever want to go back to. So when people were suggesting like, hey, what about Pittsburgh? I'm like, why in the world would I go back to that place? I just had this mental image. So, But anyway, fast forward, it's like now 2007, 2008. and it kept coming up as like a place to live. And so we came up and visited. And I visited here in February of 2008. And I remember thinking, this is nothing like what I thought it was. Anyway, long story short, we decided to move here before I even had a job. And so I interviewed with 16 different companies over a period of 4 days in February of I did 4 interviews per day. It was wild. I think back on it, like I had planned the whole thing. I would go from one to one. But what that did, first of all, it allowed me to meet like every firm in town, pretty much, all the major firms, see what they were all doing and seeing what they weren't doing. And as it happened, I was told about Desmone through Eve Picker, who was involved in development of downtown. And there's a whole separate story, but Desmone never even came up my radar because I'm like, I don't have any interest in going to work for a 15-person, family company. Like that seemed like why would I do that? But I came and I decided to come here and I interviewed with Chip and it turned out that I found that this was the perfect place for me. And the reason is that I'd been an owner of a company. And at this point, I was looking forward to not being an owner for a while. So I'm interviewing with these different companies and they're like, wait, you were just an owner of a company. Are you expecting to come here to be an owner? No, I'm coming here to be a project manager. I'm like, I'm looking forward to not being responsible for people's paychecks for a while. That's what I told people. And so that was the plan. And I came here and that was the plan. I was going to be a project manager for a few years. Great. Well, that lasted a couple months. And so it quickly turned into an opportunity where I saw that I could sort of bring something and I could sort of be the bridge between ownership and then the rest of staff and then kind of help to kind of create something. And then it kind of went from there. And so, over the last, 17 years, we've grown from about 15 to about 45 people now in this office. We now have office in Morgantown. We've had for 8 or 9 years, and we opened an office in Cleveland about 2 years ago.
As good as it sounded, I think you didn't quite realize because you didn't put yourself to the test yet that because you started your career off with, being able to or having to do basically every single part of the business, that was probably your thought process. Yeah. That was the way that you worked. So you probably were never going to be able to just be a project manager.
Right. It just kind of, I've never been one, I don't really necessarily have aspirations. I never came here and said, you know what, I'm going to run this company someday. Never. I was not thinking that. It was more like, well, there's a need and I can do that. So I will do that. And that's kind of how I just kind of progressed.
Wow.
Think of those layers though, too, because that's how you started out. You didn't expect to, escalate to what you needed to do just because of the sicknesses and, the circumstances of where you first were. But think of how that prepped you and prepared you for the other pieces that were to come that you don't have a crystal ball, so you wouldn't know where that was going to be. But man, what great experience in hindsight.
Well, I'm fascinated with successful people. And if there's 2 qualities I've noticed that all successful people have, and I don't care what it is, all successful people have, perseverance and resilience. Those 2 qualities.
Tattoos,
of course. That was the third one. But seriously, if you are resilient and you have perseverance, nothing can stop you. I've never seen anyone who has those in spades ultimately fail. And that's the space what's driven me. So the rest is just basically details at that point. It's a matter of kind of, there is a need and there is opportunity. And whenever there's a great risk, whatever there's something that can be a problem, there's also opportunity there. And always just try to see the opportunity and challenge.
What an unusual time to be migrating back to the Pittsburgh area, only because I worked downtown at that point. I worked downtown for 9 years with architects and engineers. And man, the city was going through a lot of things, from Heinz Field to the PBG.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there were just so many things happening. And those are the big name things. There were a lot of infrastructure pieces, bridges, highway rehab. Like, there were so many things going on at the time. Yeah. And I told you, friends of mine at the time, McComb Builders, and they were a little bit ahead of themselves, really. I think their vision was good with some of the things they wanted to do over on Wood Street and 4th. And, it all still worked out, and they were really great people. But man, what an interesting time to dive back into the city.
Well, let's think about early 2008 and then what happened in 2009, right? So I had been in Maryland through end of 2007. I already saw the storm coming. So we were working on a lot of development jobs down there, and we were seeing things stop overnight. And so I came to Pittsburgh and I was interviewing. I asked everyone, well, what kind of projects are you working on? And at that time, of those firms, almost all of them were saying the same 3 things. And I'm like, it doesn't take a rocket science to realize that, first of all, the storm's coming, things are going to get bad, and all that work can't be divided amongst, just. So when I talked to Chip and I said, what do you guys do? And he's like, we do a little bit of everything. I'm like, I've done a little bit of everything, because my whole experience, I did everything from schools, I did, churches, I did condos, I did everything when I was down in Maryland. Yeah. And I knew that coming into a downturn or recession, being able to be generalized and broad was going to be an advantage. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I chose to come here, is because they did a little bit of everything. And sure enough, within 2 years of me coming here, at least half of the firms I interview with either let people go, or in some cases completely disappeared within a couple years. Like it was incredible.
I wasn't even thinking of the 2007 decline and everything. When I mentioned that a minute ago, what a weird time to be coming back to Pittsburgh, it was because of all the different big projects that were either in progress or just getting ready to start. It's kind of cool.
Well, to that point, and I decided to live in downtown Pittsburgh. Yeah. No one was living in downtown Pittsburgh, especially no one with a family, right? And so I would tell my family who lived in Washington County, like, we're gonna live in downtown Pittsburgh, and they'd be like, you mean you're gonna live in Washington County and work in downtown Pittsburgh? Like, no. We're going to live in downtown Pittsburgh. And it was always the same. There'd be a pause, and it'd be like, why would you do that? Because they had this mentality. Especially when I said I was living on Penn Avenue near the red light district. Why would you live on there? Well, it's different now. And that was the advantage of not being here and then coming into it with fresh eyes. We could see the potential, whereas everyone I was talking to at the time was like, why would you be doing this? Like, Pittsburghers were the worst on themselves. They didn't see the potential of what this place could be.
Yeah. So this goes into a comment that you had made in the beginning of the podcast about the impact that you guys have had on Lawrenceville specifically. But being that I'm 26, so I always, from my aunts and uncles, when they're talking about their time when they were my age in Pittsburgh, it's always a complete reversal of what's popular and what was the bad area and where you never wanted to go. Right. And even where I'm at right now, I just talked to my pastor, and he said when we first came to Sharpsburg, everyone was telling us, why are you going to Sharpsburg? For example, and Lawrenceville was one of those places. So, I mean, it is a full circle moment to know the time frame of it. It really did take some minds that saw outside of the box and saw that, this was one of the original large cities. So the infrastructure was here. The beauty was here. You just had to, kind of slowly, psychologically transition society here to go there.
Right.
So you guys did that, though, which is so cool. We're sitting in a manifestation of it.
And a lot of the projects we work on now, we just call them sort of transformative projects, right? Like, they're things that actually have a transformative effect on the communities that they're in. And to us, that's really the best thing of what we do. To be able to work on a project, to do a building where all of a sudden now new stuff starts to happen because of that. Like, that's really fulfilling for us. Wow.
So one of the things I wanted to ask you, and it's one of Antonino's questions, is complex projects, things like that. So I think one of the pieces that you were involved with that I love the building, the Alloy 26. The old, when I was a kid growing up, that was Allegheny Center Mall. Right. That was a hangout place. And then it turned into some weird, in the 80s, like business kind of, I don't know what was going on there, but it was falling apart. And then Antonino, he's got space over there. The first time we were going to meet there, I'm thinking, oh man, what are we getting into?
Where are you going?
I go in and I'm like, holy smokes. I mean, robotics, there were all kinds of interesting, but what you guys had done with that place, incredible. Tell me about that project.
Yeah, so we worked on the Alloy 26 space, and so that what's interesting about that development is that it's had the input of a lot of local architects on it, which is great. So different architects have worked on different pieces, but right now what exists is sort of like this, an assembly of all those different kind of things. So Alloy 26 was one of the first pieces of that. Okay. So that was in the old, I think it may have been the Sears space that was. I can't remember which exactly one, but it was like, how do you take like basically an old dead mall and turn it into something? But then that sort of being an instigator, right, that sort of started it, and I think it was the largest co-working space at the time in Pittsburgh. That sort of created some critical mass, right? And see people start going there. Oh, and then now that people are going there, well, then maybe there's sort of some other value to these other buildings around it. And that's kind of how it accrued, similar to us sort of planting here, and then all of a sudden starts to happen around. It's a catalyst project.
We were just having this conversation authentically when we met as a team at the ATSAT building. You told me about that story, and we said we were talking about the people that were a part of the project. So this is pretty cool.
And the thing is, there's an authenticity I like about these older buildings. You can't get with a new building. It's like there are some cities, I won't name them specifically, but there's some cities you go to, and like they're beautiful cities, but they're like too new. Like they're missing something. They're like missing some character. There's like missing something. There's something too perfect about them. And the nice thing about Pittsburgh in general, there's a character, a little bit of imperfection, but it reminds us that it's authentic.
Oh yeah.
And then it's a quality that you can't create new, right? And that's why we love doing those kinds of projects.
Well, I think that particular space, when we talk about 26, when I talked earlier about lifestyle and how things have changed, think of how people collaborate now, business people, and all of the pods, all of the spaces and things like that you and the other architects had created in there to make it conducive for business and communication. When I just kind of burst through there and heading into Antonino's office, and I see people sitting at different tables and different spaces, and they're actually working on really cool things, and you know, it's just a completely different vibe, and it completely transformed that whole space.
Well, you mentioned, talk about COVID before, and so we did our addition, and we finished up like early 2020. Well Gold certified building, the healthiest building in the city, which we couldn't use because the government said we couldn't, right? So it's kind of ironic. And so what we did find though, is that even though we had gone to a remote option with our staff back in 2017, so we were one of the first that went to a 3-2 to allow for that flexibility. We'd already gone through a VDI and cloud-based kind of thing, and but when we were all forced to be away from each other during that time, our productivity, the quality of our work significantly decreased because there's just no substitute to some degree of interacting in real space with real people. So we went back. So when we were able to come back to the office, and we were day one when we can come back to the office, we came back and we went back to our 3-2 because that's been the best balance. It's a combination of people having the flexibility to do focused work, but also the requirement and also the opportunity for people to work. Because we forget sometimes that so many things happen with, to your point, seeing a cool project over here or something over there, hearing a conversation, right? All the things that happens in interstitial space of how we operate in our work days add so much to our work when we don't even realize it. And that's why it's so important. We found it so important to get back into physical space because that's really where we do our best work.
Yeah, that human quality.
Correct.
There's no substitute for that.
There's no substitute.
I have one more question before, because we're probably wrapping up pretty soon. I had this predetermined when I was going through your guys' website just because I'm a fan of just tech history, and I was just kind of starting out in my career when WeWork, the controversy happened with them, and just the collapse and the kind of the new narrative that it created within the tech startup world. And just had nothing to do with architecture, but it did that their actual core business model, even though they tried to get away from it so much when they were raising money, it was very similar to trying to create a place where people can live and work at the most efficient level. What was being around in that industry or in this industry during that time? What was that like? Because it became such a mainstream topic. And there were just so many variables that happened.
So we were kind of, as designers, we were both looking to like what's happening as national trends, but then also looking at what we were asking for with our actual direct clients. So, we have, so we're architecture and interiors, and we actually have a very large group of interior designers, and we're very proud of that. So we've done a lot of interior fit outs and commercial interiors and so forth. And so some of those things we were doing for those clients became sort of almost little experiments, right? So we would kind of take like, hey, we heard about this cool concept of like, I don't know, like a telephone booth or whatever. And then we would sort of start to experiment with those in these different kind of things. And that's often what helped to inform the next project or helped to inform Alloy 26, for example, was a kind of combination, best practices, but also experimenting with things that we're seeing on an actual day-to-day basis. And one of the projects we did early on, probably about 10 or 15 years ago, we did a project for IDL Matthews over near Bakery Square. It was Matthews Corporation had this building. It was all manufacturing, and they converted it because they had IDL was like their graphics portion. And that was an example where we were sort of taking an old industrial building and then bringing this new use into it, and then being able to, again, sort of experiment with these different kinds of spaces, right? The pods, the center spaces, open seating versus, open areas versus closed offices. And then it was through there that informed kind of the lexicon that we then use to sort of create other spaces. Another thing is that the large furniture manufacturers, steel cases and so forth, that was their core business. And they were doing tremendous amount of research, and they still do. They do a tremendous amount of research into workplace design, workspace design, which again, I mean, obviously they were doing that to sell products, but they were also giving us a lot of great insight as to thinking about solutions for workplace.
Yes.
And they actually would then create things instead of us having to like dream up like a custom pod. Well, they already have one that we can then use.
Okay.
And so all those things kind of coming into it were sort of what sort of formed that time. And that's a lot of creative kind of things came from there. Another thing we also saw was like the whole, this whole resi kind of thing, like the residential thing, like why do you walk into offices now and it feels like a home? It's pretty obvious, right? Because people get used to work for home and they want to have a comfortable place.
Yes.
Or like borrowing from like hotels, like hospitality. Those types of themes worked into office design to create places that were going to be more conducive to people to be creative, to interact more, and to enjoy the space they're in.
So last question, in regards to this topic, you had mentioned that you were able to sort of predict what was happening in 2007, 2008, just by being in the space and kind of getting a pulse of what you were seeing. How was your estimation of what happened to WeWork? Were you able to, as a person that's in the industry, see that he was overvaluing the business? And
not at the time, because I wasn't paying so much to the actual business side of it, right? To really know. I mean, in retrospect, it seems pretty obvious. But like I was not. We were looking at it more from the design perspective, as opposed to the business. And I would argue that it was the business aspect and all that stuff was what really kind of tanked that.
Of course. But when you would go on mainstream media outlets and try to call it a tech company, I imagine that at least had a certain red flag from your perspective, because they couldn't have been the farthest thing from it. Oh yeah. I needed to mention that. I just watched the documentary again. So it's just on. So it's a fun topic.
You're definitely in an interesting field, and you've had an interesting career, and there's a lot more years to come, I'm sure. Where do you see things going with architecture and design? And it doesn't even have to be like in the Pittsburgh area, but generally speaking, what kind of changes do you see? And, for people that are maybe heading into school, or maybe they're already in a career and they're going to transition out and maybe start their own business or something like that, what opportunities do you see out there in this particular world?
It is. I mean, well, I will say the level of I want to say even advancement of change over the last 1, 2, 3, 5 is just unprecedented. Like, and I'm not even sure where it's going to go. I will say this. I mean, we talk about AI and stuff, but AI it has the power to absolutely transform in a positive or negative way everything that we do as human beings. And obviously buildings are going to be a huge part of that. So what we're really looking to is sort of like, just very simply, how is AI going to sort of fit into this? The way I look at it is this, like I'm one of those people that watched all the Terminator movies. I have my opinions of where things, but I choose to be positive about it. And I actually see this as an opportunity for us. If we leverage this technology properly, we can create new levels of experience that we've never been able to achieve before.
Yes.
And that is where I'm hopeful. So the opportunities are there is, first of all, those who are going in architecture school or design, all these things overlap now. Architecture is basically designed for buildings, but what we refer to as buildings is going to start to blur. It already does, an experience. If you experience a headset in something and you're in a building, what is the experience coming from? Is it coming from the headset? Is it coming from the architecture? Is it coming from both? The answer is yes, it's all those things. And so to be able to think creatively and sort of expand and go across these different types of different divisions, I think that's really where the exciting thing is going to come. So going back to sort of being able to work with other people with different disciplines, work with our engineers, but even work with things like biology and so forth. All these things that are combined, I think, and have the potential of creating entirely new experiences, spaces, buildings that we could have never even dreamed of prior. Or we may have dreamed of prior, but only in like a one-dimensional sense, like a big building, but not a big building that was like also literally made us healthier. And so what we've been trying to do and sort of focusing on this is that we've decided as a company, and all the things that are going around, like our position moving forward is that human beings have to be the center of everything we do. Human beings have to be the center. Human beings are the things, are who we design buildings for. And I say that as if it's obvious. It's not obvious. We usually don't design buildings for people. People need to be the center of everything we design for. People need to be the center of all the things we do as a company in terms of our policies and how we actually treat people. And that needs to be the center. And then beyond that, our belief as a company is, okay, so if we sort of see a lot of the problems of culture coming from the fact that people aren't in physical space anymore. We're disconnected by technology. It's a lot easier for me to yell at you from across my phone than to sit here and then basically yell at you in your face, right? So we believe part of the solution to humanity's problems is getting people back into physical space. Yes. Who designs physical spaces? Architects and designers and engineers, right? We believe that if we do good work, we can create spaces that heal people, and if we heal people, we can heal humanity. So simply put, we believe we can heal culture with our work, and that's what's driving us. Instead of taking, it's easy to be negative. It's easy to be negative. It's easy to say the world is going to burn. It's harder to see the vision, but if we do and we're successful, it's absolutely incredible what we can create, right? It's limitless. We can literally go into space. Like all those science fiction movies we saw, where people are inhabiting different, that's how you get there, right? By challenging things and going beyond. And I think technology will allow us to get there.
You answered my next question before I even asked it. I wanted to know what makes you go, what makes you enjoy this, what makes you love it. And you kind of just explained that. It's the human side.
Yes.
You want to make it better for people.
Yes.
I'm going to give you a real quick example. So I take the kids to the Pixar exhibit over at the Carnegie Science Center. And beautiful, man. And just the layout and the flow and all those, that is architecture too.
Yes, absolutely.
That's space layout.
Design.
And then they keep retrofitting it for another exhibit. There's some fantastic, amazing lighting and,
yes.
All of the senses, the different from touch and feel and light and everything else that you see. I think that's one of the things that you folks do.
Yes.
And when it's done really well, we talk about it. And I think when it's done whatever the right way is, we don't talk about it as much, but when it's poorly done, we know there's a problem. We know there's something wrong.
We inherently know. It's like we can tell. We as human beings, most people may not be able to talk architecture per se, but everyone understands it. Everyone at a fundamental level, because it's actually a visceral thing. It actually is. The old part of our brain understands space. We may not be able to put, it's like I use a word like music. Everyone can agree that we all appreciate music. Well, their musicians know how to create music and put it together. They know the notes, they know all the things that go into it. But doesn't mean that another person can't enjoy that. Similar. So everyone can appreciate architecture. Yeah. Everyone knows architecture. Architects are just the ones who just create the architecture in a sense. Yeah. We create the space. And then we're creating environments, right? To your point, that environment takes all the senses. It's a holistic experience.
Well, I think that this was a really fun podcast interview for one thing.
Oh my goodness.
And, I was excited about it because this was part of my background for X amount of years, just working with people like yourself. So I understand a little bit, but man, the insights that you just provided, I can't wait. I think our listeners, our audience, our viewers are going to get a lot of benefit from this conversation. And one thing that we always ask, and Antonino had it on here, was if you had to give one word of advice to a new entrepreneur, a career-changing person, what would you tell them? What do they need to do?
Look for the opportunity and the challenge. Every single challenge, I don't care how hard it is, represents an opportunity. And sometimes the best opportunities comes from the biggest challenges. So I'd say I go back to what I said before, perseverance and resilience. Rely upon those two things. And those are the things that will guide you. Everything else, if you're willing to work for something and you're willing to stay focused on it, allow yourself to fail and allow discomfort to be your friend. Embrace discomfort, embrace ambiguity. This is coming from someone, by the way, who hates ambiguity. But I also have learned that ambiguity is really it's sort of the cauldron by which really great, amazing things come if you can persevere.
Well, there was one really important thing that you said earlier too. Multiple things you said were really important, but one that stood out when you said the guy gave you the advice when you talked about Cornell and forget everything you know. Man, that's such a great way to look at clean slates and pulling yourself back in and realizing you don't know everything. Give yourself a chance to learn a little bit more. That's cool.
Pause for yourself, right?
Yes. What else you got, buddy? Anything?
I just wanted to say, Eric, you've inspired me today. I'm going to be going back home and just thinking. I like to think. I like to sit on things. Usually I'm listening to podcasts, but I got to be a part of this one. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you guys
so
for
much.
the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Eric Booth, we appreciate your time.
Sure.
And, man, what a great place. And we're looking forward to seeing a lot of wonderful things from you in this Desmone organization.